Great. We're at session 3, and it's a thematic session. It's data. There is a whopping 2 hours and 10 minutes devoted to data. Not knowing everything you ever need to know about data, you have failed. Is that not right, Patricia? Okay. Look, it's a complicated session with moving parts. So let me outline it very quickly. There's 3 parts. Part 1 is Patricia McCartney will, who's president and CEO of the World Council on City Data, will introduce it shortly. And that really is a series of presentations. We then move on to part 2 with presentations from a different perspective. And I think it's only fair to the participants that we don't just have presentation after presentation after presentation. I'll try and mix it up. Does anyone know what a moderator's joker card is? Does anyone know? Well, it means that I get the opportunity just to rip the session apart and bring in some questions. So that's all right, isn't it, Patricia? Good, that's fine. That's part 2. Then part 3 is the really exciting bit, and that's where we all get to dive in and ask questions, nail these experts down in terms of the reality of data and the LDGs, and there's a number of people who'll come in and make points and discuss. So it's a rich feast again. Time discipline, I think, is key, and it's been marvelous so far today. Is anyone in the wrong room? If you are, leave now. No, it's all good. Has everyone had enough coffee? Well, if the panel haven't had enough coffee, we're really in trouble. Bob, is my microphone working okay? Can people hear me? Yeah? Good. So, Patricia, with no further ado, session 3, data. Patricia McCartney, President and CEO of the World Council on City Data. What have I missed out? What are we about to experience? Over to you.
And is it on? Yeah, it's on. The first and main reason we're here today is because we all understand the importance of localizing the agenda. We all understand the importance of local governments in leading on the SDGs. But what has been lacking in the past and during the Millennium Development Goals, we saw this as one of the issues was data. So we're using data now to help to generate, and this comes up very nicely and from as a segue from the previous session when we were asked about the idea of citizens embracing the SDGs. And we can ask the same question, how do cities embrace the SDGs in local governments and provincial governments? We believe the answer is through data. So we will start the session, and as Paul mentioned, the first part is really, we're trying to think about, when I was speaking to my colleague from Canada, the chief statistician, Anil, yesterday on the phone, yesterday here, he said, you know, there's a real patchwork of data out there. So the first session, we're going to look at local, national, and global. So we have here UNSD and the Chief Statistician of Canada and myself for the local. So we have the global, national, local, because we believe harmonization of data across all of these levels and how we think it through is so critical to the success of the SDGs. The other point that we're going to really try to harp on is this need for capacity at the local level, so that cities around the world are in need of deep and serious financial and technical capacity to build data. And we will get into why this is so important, but without data, you really can't drive the agenda forward to 2030. Data informs investment, and it informs movement forward by evidence-based decision in sustainable development investments in infrastructure. We heard it from the Development Bank of Southern Africa this morning, the DBSA. Infrastructure is so key to building more sustainable cities. So how do we guide that? It's with data, I would strongly argue during this session. So that's it. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, great. Patricia, and again, just in terms of the speakers and some of you who weren't here this morning, we're looking for double espressos, adrenaline shots, rather than the long stuff, all right? And that's to ring-fence space for the conversation. And with some honorable exceptions, because data, I guess, is both complicated and sexy, and it needs a bit of time for people like Patricia to present. So there will be some exceptions, but I would therefore open the session with, at the, I guess, the multilateral, the global level. We have Stefan Schweinfest, Director, United Nations Statistical Division, and your colleagues speak very, very highly of you, Daniel. Stefan, sorry, Stefan. So the pressure is on you. You've got 4 to 5 minutes, and we would love to hear the perspective from the global level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. So let's get this going. We're going from the global to the national to the local, so I sit on top of the Olymp. That's a nice position to be in.
Where'd you sit
on top of the Olympus. So when we launched the, but I know this is really serious because this morning at 11 o'clock I launched this thing, which is the Global SDG 2017 report. This is the authoritative report that the Secretary General needs to present to the General Assembly every year, how we are doing with the SDGs in total. And of course, you'll forgive me, I barged in right away with the SDGs, but I mean, if you work at the UN these days, I mean, SDGs is what you're talking about. So I told the people this is a global report, is the tip of the iceberg. These are global data. You won't even find country data in here because it talks about Africa, it talks about regions and sub-regions, but that is the tip of an enormous information iceberg, and underneath you have national data, you have subnational data, and of course regional data in both directions, continental data and subnational, and local data. So, and I think if we get that whole data architecture right, then we have a real chance to support all the various decision nodes for the SDGs where decisions have to be taken, because the SDGs have to be implemented at many levels, at the global level, at the national level, at the local level, and at the sectoral levels. And every decision node needs the appropriate information system, but these information systems cannot be in isolation. They need to be linked with each other. That's why we need a global architecture, because otherwise we're going to just confuse everybody with the information that we are providing. If we can't add them up and they don't make sense, we will not be able to change policies and change minds, and that's exactly what we ultimately want to do with our data. So here comes in Patricia one day. I did not know her, but boy did I know her after the first hour I met her. So was very impressed how dynamic she is, and I mean, we were kindred spirits. Her position as the World Council of City Data leader, she immediately started talking about methods and standards, and this is something I love, of course, as a chief statistician, because we need to define methods and standards so that we all speak the same language, and only then, like, data at all the various levels are really connected. So my job is, we have the GA resolution with 232 indicators. Actually, the GA resolution is as young as 10 days today. And there will be many reports with many data, but our job as the statistical community is to make sure that we keep it all together. And we have various mechanisms for that. We have the Statistical Commission, which is the classical UN intergovernmental body, but we also do recognize that we need lots of help and partners. That's why we have now a World Data Forum, which we organized last year successfully. And normally when you build an event related to statistics and data, everybody is running in the other direction. But this time we actually had 1,400 people showing up at a UN World Data Forum. That was very successful.
Stefan, why do people run in the other direction? Why did you say that?
Well, I've been 28 years in the statistics office. Every time when I said I'm working in the statistical office, they changed the conversation on me. I tried a trick now. I say I work on information management. That sounds a lot more sexy and interesting, and gets me at least a second date or something. Like.
So your time has come. So
absolutely, I would definitely say that.
I'm just playing a little bit with Patricia's mind. She scarified me in February for saying data wasn't sexy, but I'm glad you're going to get a second date. Keep going, Stefan. Sorry.
So I think I like the idea of building local data hubs, but in order, if we do this, and I mean, you've done enormous work and we will learn about this in standardizing sets of indicators, there are a couple of conditions to be successful. And one is there needs to be a link to the Statistical Commission, which is really tasked to keep the connection with the global indicator system and the global data. It would not be good if we develop now fantastic city data and they were in no way connected to national data. So I think I liked very much when I met you for the first time, you came with somebody from the Dutch National Statistical Office who was very much involved, because city data are part of national data. They are not existing in a vacuum. And so that is one important condition. The other condition is that people from the UN system are on board. I know we have colleagues in UNDP, UNEP, Habitat, and I'm sure there are many more here in this room who are working on bits of this piece, and we need to work on all of this together. My last remark, and then you can ask me tons of questions, is geospatial information is really critical, and we have just launched a big program on geospatial information. The marriage of statistical data and maps is extraordinarily powerful. If you work at the local level, it comes natural to you because you have a space in mind. But I think in general terms, I think we need to do better in integrating these two fundamental information systems, which then help you also to see where the policy problems are local. I mean, if you give data for a whole country, that may be informative, but it doesn't help you to understand where exactly you need to intervene. So I'm preaching to the converted here, but I just wanted to highlight that we have a big program on geospatial information, and it's linked to statistical information, and I find it very exciting. So I'll stop here, and then people can ask questions later on in the discussion.
Stefan, that's perfect. Actually, you know what? I'm guessing in the room there's quite a spectrum of knowledge about data, from zero through to super data people who get second dates. Now data is the topic of the month. So I'm just going to allow a couple of questions if necessary, in terms of, so we don't widen the spectrum. If anyone wants to clarify anything, if there are any points you'd like to quickly pick up, let's do that now to Stefan. No? All data experts? Oh, thank you very much. I'm Susan from the UN, I believe. Quick question to Stefan.
Thanks, Mr. Schweinfest. I remember participating in an event with you last year addressing the matter of third-party data and how we would perhaps standardize so some of the data being used through crowdsourced platforms or GIS and other realms could possibly be used in the more formal context of the Statistics Commission's considerations. I'd love to hear your take on any progress on that now.
Briefly on progress, Stefan.
Okay, no 7-hour speech?
No, but if you want. But
no. People always ask me about citizen-reported data, and then they expect me to get a heart attack as a director of statistics. And I don't, because, I mean, a census and a survey are citizen-reported data. There is no more classical instrument. But what it is, a census and a survey are highly structured citizen-reported data. Now, I think there are many other citizen-reported data or civil society data and so on and so forth that are less structured. So, I mean, they need to be subjected to some form of review, whether they are fit for the purpose that they are proposed to be used for. There need to be quality assurances that people do not report certain things with a malicious intent because they have a certain reaction in view and may not be driven primarily by the quest for providing accurate information. So I think we need to guard ourselves. We all need to be careful. We also in our day-to-day life, we assign trust to certain sources of information. And I mean, you can establish trust over time. And the Statistical Commission has a big program. There's this big data for official data, and where we look at certain data sources that can be helpful and can be systematically used for official statistics. And I can tell you, in terms of short-term data challenges, like in a humanitarian or disaster kind of situation, I think it's critically important that we pair up the official information that we may have of what's the infrastructure of the area affected, how many people live here, how much social infrastructure is there in terms of schools, or economic infrastructure in terms of factories. Pair that with information from the people who live in that area that they can guide you how to support any intervention effectively.
Stefan, thank you very much. And let's put our hands together for Stefan from the United Nations. Moving on to the national level, delighted to introduce Anil Arora, Chief Statistician of Canada, Statistics Canada, which I guess is part of the government, right? So, Anil, welcome, and you have your 3 to 4 minutes just to give us that adrenaline shot. Thank you.
All right. Great. Well, thank you very much. Firstly, I just want to recognize the efforts of Patricia. Just appreciate the invitation. And obviously the support of the government in Canada. Its support and good evidence, I think, enables us to do the kind of work that we're doing both domestically as well as on the international stage, may I add. And we're delighted to take a proactive role in working with Stefan and his folks. We in Canada are taking a leadership role, not just in developing local national data, but also building international capacity with some of our work on the international stage as well. So I can go into more in detail if you're interested. Just wanted to kind of leave you with, I think, to your point, some of the espresso shots. The first one is, we really do have to get behind the vision of this, and it's really about empowerment through credible and trustworthy data that are comparable, that make sense. I mean, you've seen out there, different people come out with different kind of results, whether it's elections, whether it's Brexit, you name it. And I know I'm talking about polling a little bit, but it just gets to tell you a little bit about the dangers, if you like, if you don't have rigorous processes in place that can convert data into statistics and evidence that actually means something. And that is the role that NSOs play. And if that role isn't there, all you are is data rich but information poor. And I think that is a real risk, and that's something that we take very seriously. And especially when you look at SDGs and you now push the data down to local levels, community level, especially when you're looking at different types of sources, you need to be extremely careful about what they're telling us, and especially if you're going to have now policy decisions that are going to be made on those data. So credibility is absolutely critical here, and that credibility comes from a science. It's far more than emotional, if you like. So it's not just you get more data, you get better decisions. You have to do that transcription role between good data and good decision making. So that's the first point I just want to make. Look, statistical agencies have always tried to get more and more granular data right down to the local level. So this notion that, oh my God, this is a great, we've always tried. So why haven't we already done it? Why isn't it already there? Well, there are really two ways in which you get at local data. One is through surveys, and you need to have huge sample sizes in order to get at data at the local level that means something. Well, why haven't we done it already? Well, there's costs, there's burden, and there are other practical limitations, if you like, of going down and surveying people. I mean, if you look at, my kids, for example, they're not really interested in an hour-long survey anymore. If you can't fit the questions on an iPhone screen, you pretty well have lost them. So there's societal change in attitudes in terms of how they want to interact with statistical agencies as well, and that's changing at a fairly rapid pace. So it's not just technology, but it's also social attitudes, and it's burden issues and so on. And limitations of sampling. As I said, ground truth, very different, depending upon the sample, especially if you start to now dice it up into all sorts of different, dimensions. And as I said, privacy and confidentiality concerns, especially on the business side. All of a sudden, you start to get to local employers, especially if you've got a predominance, supply. You've got to worry about all those things when you're starting to, come up with something that makes sense. The second source is through administrative sources, and I think that's been touched on before as well. But administrative sources, many of them are unstructured. They were collected for a specific purpose with certain definitions and exclusions and so on. Sometimes they're not even well documented, so you don't even know what you're getting. And that's really, really a problem. And so it's not just a matter of harnessing what's there, but it's actually mining it and understanding it first and foremost before you can make it something that's a consumable commodity. So administrative data, it's great, that's the future, but it's really, with some cautions there as well. And the whole notion of coherence and standardization and metadata and all those things that, put you to bed start to become really, really important. So look, for NSOs, what are we doing? Some of the key aspects, what are we doing at the national level? What are we doing at Statistics Canada to kind of move this whole agenda forward? First of all, this new way of going forward is not possible without partnerships. And so we're putting a lot of emphasis on traditional partnerships and non-traditional partnerships. That old model of we as a statistical agency are just going to go out there and collect information, we'll just make it available, I think those days are gone. We're really now going from a goods producing industry, if you like, to more of a service producer. We have to actually earn our value because the data sources come from a whole variety of sources. So we need to be mindful of that. Two is, that partnership is going to be really important also because we're going to have to unduplicate things. Partners come with data, and partners come with data needs as well, and we have to bridge, if you like, those divides in many cases and manage those expectations. Second thing we're doing, building capacity. Believe it or not, I think as was said earlier, the amount of information that people have out there, consumers that have out there, or that sophistication is overestimated. We absolutely have to go back to fundamental first principles. We have to start in high schools. We have to start with educational institutions. And we actually have to put consumable products out there so people understand what a data-driven society means again and what it doesn't mean. Three is we're looking at innovative methods. So we're looking at big data analytics, crowdsourcing, modeling and linking, and transactional data, using sensors and satellite imagery. So there's a lot of innovative work in play to harness existing data sources because, as I said, the traditional model of going out there and just asking people for more information isn't going to be the answer in the long run. And we won't be able to afford it either. So we really have to look for imperfect in some cases, unstructured, but we have to actually add value and make it more consumable. Third thing that we're doing is we're investing in tools to turn data into consumable information. Trying to simplify things. We're trying to contextualize things. We're allowing far more comparisons to things. And we're adding a lot of data visualization tools, whether it's geospatial, infographics, you name it. We're looking at easier ways so that people don't have to be PhDs in data manipulation to actually get at what it's telling you. And we want to make it simpler for people. So that's a lot of work on our side. Tools to assess quality. We're actually developing tools that people can use in any context to assess and, in fact, incent organizations to up the game, if you like, in terms of the quality of the data and the metadata that have to go along with it. I think that's a responsibility that we have to take. And communications. It's not just through traditional means, but we're also looking at social media, trying to intervene at the right spot in between conversations, and obviously appeal to the new generation in terms of how they converse and consume information. So for us to put all our emphasis in traditional sources and forget about the way the actual world works today, again, we would do all this great work but miss the opportunity. So 3 key points. 1, we need to get the fundamental data elements right. I think both Patricia and Stefan have talked about this thing. We need to interject the role of the NSO to ensure responsible use, turn the data into consumable evidence, and that is the key to sound decision making. And that's where I think NSOs need to take a leadership role, and we need to make the room and take the room, if you like, in making sure that the capacity is there and that the credibility that we bring. As I said, we can have a lot of data out there, and if there's even an element of a policy, a direction that's gaming it, we're done before we even start. So the credibility of what comes out of this is essential that people have to be able to understand that that data that they're using and consuming wasn't gamed in some way. Second point, strengthening partnerships. I already talked about it. This is going to take prioritization. We're not going to be able to do everything all at once. There are going to be limitations. We're going to have to communicate clearly, and there's an interdependence here between an NSO and all the different providers. So it's a lot of complexity, a lot of volume, as I think you've all heard, and there's going to be a lot of voices. So there's a lot of opportunity for mass confusion, and I think we're going to have to make sure that we don't disperse this and actually lose the credibility and the momentum. The third last point, it's a bit of a cat and mouse game. You know, data availability and policy interventions, they're not neat. You know, believe it or not, policy decisions get made ahead of data sometimes. So we're going to have to figure out this interdependent and this interrelated nature, if you like, of the interventions. And we're going to have to look at the indicators of progress. And so this is going to be a bit messy. So we're going to have to leave room for evolution, and we're going to have to leave room to learn and adapt as we go forward. So back to you.
You know, wonderfully structured and framed, super clear. If you did all the right things and you failed to gain the trust of the general populace and the politicians, whose fault will it be?
Well, you know, what does it matter whose fault it is? Because at the end of the day, you got to start back at square one. Everybody's got to do their part. And that's why I think the partnership and the kinds of partnerships that I'm talking about are going to be essential. People have to understand that we either all fail or we all win. So that's going to require a very different type of partnership here. It's going to require us to be innovative in looking at the types of data sources, the types of robust methodologies, the linkages that Stefan talked about, that Patricia talked about, and then being able to clearly articulate both the strengths of what you're putting out, but more importantly, what are the limitations of what we aren't able to put out.
Okay, good. Let's put our hands together. Thank you for that. Patricia, how long do you want for this spectacular presentation?
You told me I couldn't do death by PowerPoint, but I'm preparing for death by PowerPoint. Just kidding. There are PowerPoints up on the slide because a lot of the data, instead of, I think I've gone off or, okay. Instead of using indicators and numbers, and I'm just going to drop visual slides up, and you can just have a look at what we're doing. So, No, it's fine. And I don't have a clicker up here, so unfortunately, James, you're going to have to help me. And James is our Executive Vice President for International External Affairs, so, but he also knows how to push a button. Thank you, James.
Okay, Patricia, great. Over to you. I guess sort of somewhere between 8 and 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, not more.
Game on.
And I have a couple of things I want to do here. So one is just to introduce what we're working on the local data front. And secondly, to talk about this new report that we're just launching. And third is to talk about the data hubs. So, Paul, if you want, I can talk about the data hubs later.
Just go for it.
You can cut me
go
off.
For it. Let's just roll.
Okay.
Would people like the lights down a little bit, or can you see the screens clearly? We're good? Okay. We want it dropped. Can we drop the lights just a touch?
Okay, so the first slide is data is the universal language. We feel that data has become a shared language across the world, and that's people are starting to begin speaking this rather fluently, even if it's just based on our personal data, or whether we're thinking about NASA satellite imagery all the way across the spectrum from your personal cell up to satellite. The work of the WCCD is building city-level data that is globally standardized. And this city data is what we say at the WCCD. It's becoming a universal language. It allows cities to talk to each other. It allows citizens to talk to each other. It empowers citizens, and it empowers cities. So globally standardized data enables cities not only to speak across administrative boundaries. So I'm looking at Cambridge. We have Cambridge and Buenos Aires here, two of our member cities. They can talk across their administrative boundary within their own country with apples-to-apples data. But they can also speak from Buenos Aires to Cambridge here in the room, or to Dubai, not in the room, etc., through standardized data. So it also empowers citizens. It helps to drive, the next slide please, it helps to drive basic questions for citizens, and we try to make the data as usable as we can. So how safe is my city? How clean is my air? How much does my city recycle? Quality of primary education in Mecca, for example, primary school completion rates, students completing primary survival rate in Jamshedpur. This is a really great number, which Jamshedpur is very proud of. The long story of the last 8 years of our lives at the WCCD, and all my staff are here in the room, and colleagues who have helped us with this. We took 100 indicators to ISO in 2012 with a view to building an ISO standard, the first standard for cities. Next. The working group, which I chair at ISO, there's 28 countries around the table, and we fight it out basically every 3 months to standardize definitions and standardize methodologies on what's being measured across indicators for cities. Next. So the first ISO standard was published in 2014. It took us 2 years to get there, but it would normally take 6 years, but because we'd already tested it around the world and cities had been contributing to the original draft. So these are indicators. The 100 indicators are indicators that cities chose, they prioritized, and they developed. And when we started, there were 1,100 indicators put on the table by 9 cities. We asked a basic question: what are you measuring, and what are your priorities to measure? Turned out they were all measuring the same things. They're measuring waste and water and transit and safety and education and health. All the same things were being measured. But instead of having apples to apples data, there were, out of the 1,100 indicators that the 9 cities put on the table, there were only 2 that were comparable. There were only 2 indicators that they could actually talk to each other. So we created the ISO standard to try and overcome that challenge so that cities could actually be conversant with each other. So the 17 themes, as I mentioned, those are the priority themes and the priority indicators that the cities created. I wanted to now touch also on this idea of localizing the SDGs. We've been talking a lot about it this morning and in the last session, and I just wanted to point to the fact that it's really very important that we begin to think about local governments and provincial governments in how we start to think about these themes, every one of the 17 themes. What does it mean for a local government to be active on no poverty, or to be active on no hunger, or so we've mapped it across all of the 17 themes. And you know, city leaders are extremely important in thinking about every single goal, as it turned out. So in goal 1, for example, no poverty, it's government leaders and their professional staff that are responsible for urban basic services that alleviate poverty, including water, sanitation, education, transport, all central to goal 1. In looking at goal 2, for example, zero hunger, it's local officials again that help to direct child nutrition programs. It's provincial governments that help to ensure efficient location and on-time transport for food terminals, for example. In goal 3, around education, around health, the target of road and traffic accidents, it's local planners and local transport planners and infrastructure investors that are building these safer and safer roads. It's also city planners and urban designers driving alternative energy. They're driving energy for different forms of transport to reduce air pollution. And by planning walkable cities and safe bike paths, they're also positioned to help foster healthy lifestyles, a core target of Goal 3. So we go through every one of the goals in this report that we've put together. And this report is being launched today, I guess. I'm looking at James. Yes, it's going live as a PDF. I think it's been embargoed, but it's out there as of this session. So we're really pleased to be releasing this report. It looks like this in hard copy. I brought a few copies along. So I just wanted to run you through, and this is why I chose to do a PowerPoint, because it's very hard to show you exactly what's in this book, but you can have a look while I go through it. It's very, we can start. So we map every single theme. Under no poverty, for example, we look at the indicators mapping process. So we looked at the UN targets that Stefan and his office have been so diligently working on in incredible detail. The last IAEG meeting I was at I had no idea the level of detail to get to every one of those indicators in the middle column for every one of the targets. So what we've been doing at the WCCD on the right column is to take our ISO 37120 data, and we've been mapping it across to especially the targets, because they don't always align with the national, but they are there to support the target. Why are we doing this? Because it allows cities to actually embrace the SDGs. It allows cities to start to think about progress towards the SDGs. They will never be able to, help 100% on reporting by your national governments, but cities need to know about them. They need to embrace them. And what better way than with data to start to monitor progress towards each and every one of the themes. Even in oceans, we have mapped it, and there's tremendous potential for cities to contribute to Goal 14. It's the one that we really didn't think we had much data on, but turns out there's quite a bit of data on this point. So I'm just going to now take probably 2 seconds per slide, James. So this is just a mapping of all the different indicators by themes. I've only put a few up. So zero hunger, under age 5 mortality, under health, number of physicians per 100,000. We have number of nurses and midwives, inpatient hospital beds. The transportation fatalities one maps very well, as does fine particulate matter to 2.5. So some of them map completely in line with the global targets, and some are really specific to cities. Under education, the same mapping we did, moving it through students completing secondary higher ed degrees. We've done this for every theme, number of businesses, employment, cities' unemployment rates. This is all city-level data for the first time that's standardized. On Goal 11, of course, when we looked at the mapping, this is the one where we have probably 45 indicators that support each and every one of those targets. So that's a rather extensive part of the report. I think it's 30 or 40 slides. And I'll just give you a glimpse of those. So the number of homeless people, kilometers of light passenger, municipal solid waste. Just keep going, 1 second per slide. That's it. So under this report that we've just released, you can start to see some of the data across the first 50 cities. So I'm just going to move now to my final point, which is these local data hubs that we discussed a little bit this morning. The local data hubs are something that the WCCD has been thinking about now over the past few years to start to build out the local data ISO collaboration across cities. So when we were working, for example, with Johannesburg, they and the national government of Johannesburg and the national statistics bodies there, they thought it would be very important to get all 8 metros, for example, certified ISO 37120. So we've opened, or we're just about to open a hub in Johannesburg, which will serve preliminarily.
Patricia, sorry for interrupting,
yeah.
but we've had a request from the translators just to drop the pace a little bit. Okay.
But how will I stick to my...
well, you won't, but as you know, the translators rule.
Okay.
And we always respect what they ask for.
All right, thank you, Paul. He's given me permission to slow down. I'm so happy. I was really rushing. Okay, so these are the hubs. One in Cambridge, and I'm so happy that Cambridge and Buenos Aires are both here with us today. These are 2 of the major hubs that we're opening. Toronto is, of course, the global hub where the WCCD is based. Very proud to be a Canadian-born entity, although we are a global hub. Los Angeles, Johannesburg in South Africa, as I mentioned, MENA, Nigeria. The governor will be here in 2 weeks at the UN to sign the agreement and receive an award. So we're meeting with him here too, the governor of Niger State and the mayor of MENA. In Dubai, we had our summit there a few months ago, and we started to talk about how that hub will work in Dubai. And then Haiphong, Vietnam, and Makati are both 2 more of the hubs that have that we are announcing today. And the objectives of these hubs are to showcase leadership, of course, to demonstrate results, to catalyze action, and to enable city-to-city learning. And finally, I just wanted to touch on this partnership. It keeps coming up, and it's so important for this data work that we have global, national, local, lots of city-level cooperation and partnerships. And we also have Barbara here from Philips, because we also believe the partnerships have to build horizontally from cities to private sector partners like Philips, who are really helping so much on LED lighting and other things. And our national government as well, with Adam here. So these partnerships across all the multiple stakeholders, we've been building this since about 2014, and Tata Trust, for example, and the philanthropy, I was thinking about it this morning with the Rockefeller presentation. We have a Tata Trust partnership where we're now certifying 18 cities in India to be ISO certified. This is really important because it builds capacity at the local level by Tata helping to build that on the ground in cities. Because it's hard to build data. Data is very, I guess I can say, you know, in working in a lot of city halls around the world, data is often in metal filing cabinets in different departments of City Hall. And it's more than siloed. It's in really bad shape. So we need to pull it out of those filing cabinets. We need to electrify it. We need to digitalize it, and we need to make it open. So that empowers citizens. And these kinds of partnerships with Philips, with Tata, with the United Nations groups, because once the cities report the data to the WCCD, because of ISO, we have to send it out to third-party verifiers. So we have to have the data audited. And it's a process, and it's a bit painstaking, I would say. Well, I'm looking at Cambridge and Carlos. They're not nodding, but it's difficult. Because when we send it out to third-party verifiers and the audit process begins, the auditors are dealing directly with the cities. We have a firewall. So we're building as high a caliber, local-level data according to an ISO standard as we could possibly create and implement. So it's these partnerships that I wanted to really underline, because Goal 17 is all about partners. So I thought in coming here today with all of our partners and all of the stakeholders in the room, this is an important call to partners to step up. We're going to continue over the next 6 months to talk to partners across the world, funding partners, technical partners, et cetera, to help us, because as cities get this data together, as they start to report the data and they put it up on an open data portal, the culture of data that gets built in cities, it's a culture of data that we believe is driving a culture of innovation, and which we really, and I can't underline it enough, is pivotal if we're going to reach the SDGs by 2030. Thank you. Thank you, James.
Can we have the lights up, please? James, that was some of the best button pressing. Seriously. No, that was world-class button pressing. How long were you at school for?
Oh my God,
years. Yeah. No, it's all important, James. Thank you very much indeed. Patricia, thank you for that run through. Right. I think you need to give James a raise, okay? No, not a clap, a raise.
Thank you, you're too kind.
Okay. So look, that's the end of part one. And when I put out the first requests for questions, I just had these sort of, I'm sorry, the blank expressions, including you people who are all millennials and should know about data, right? You've got some of the world's leading experts here, and you haven't got one question for them. And you most probably know more than they do. So I'm now going to give you another option to ask questions. Thank God, a question. Just hold your hand in the air there for a second. And another one. It's just, we've got three, okay? Any over here? And we've got four. Good. Right. Quick question. Target it. And introduce yourself first. So we'll do the gentleman with the beard. I'm sorry for describing you like that. The lady here in the white jacket in the front. Then we've got Amelia, and then the lady on the far right, and then our friend from C40. So that's 5 questions. That's great. Let's make it espresso. Question, answer, bang, move on. Please.
Hello, my name's Dan. I'm from the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation, civil society network in Canada. And excuse me, I might have missed something because we had the kind of introduction to the ISO indicators, then they're linked to the goals, then there were the hubs, but I still don't really understand what the hubs are. Are they promoting this linkage between the ISOs and the SDGs, or are they promoting best practices? What do they actually do?
Patricia, do you want to just take that quickly? Or let's take that one, deal with it, and then we'll basket some questions. Yeah. Thanks for your question. Are you Australian? So what was your organization again?
I was going to ask this. It's the BC, the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation. So
you are living the dream. That's fantastic. Patricia.
Global citizen.
Yeah, Patricia, back to you. Mike.
These agreements with the cities, but let me take a cut at it right now. So one of the key starting points of the hubs is to help build data across one core city. We have these foundation cities in the world. So say, for example, I won't speak to the first 2, but say, for example, one city in Nigeria, Mina. In that case, every hub is different because every hub has different priorities. But in the case of Nigeria, for example, the idea is that the governor of Niger State wants to have all of the municipalities in his state ISO certified so that they can compare notes across all of the cities to better guide infrastructure investment, for example. So the idea is to build these hubs so that we can start to get a horizontal connectivity going on the ground with cities committed to data that's comparable. We really do believe that these cities will provide a platform to grow the network of data-driven cities in the country and in the region. I won't speak for Carlos, but we know that there's 8 mayors who also want to be part of in the metropolitan region of Buenos Aires that need this. Then the second point of the hub, in general terms, is to ensure this annual reporting of the ISO certified data, so the local data hubs will directly demonstrate year-over-year progress towards local, national, and the global goals. So the SDGs is very much at the center of it. And when Carrie came to us and talked to us about this idea of Local 2030, this became a really important takeoff point for how we could start to have Local 2030 as an umbrella for these hubs. This is a really important opportunity. The third was catalyzing action. So shall I keep going? I can give you more detail in writing if you want. I know you're
Patricia,
taking notes on it.
let's hover that there,
okay,
and maybe bring in Matthew very quickly with an additional. Patricia had proffered and offered you, so just keep it brief, Matthew. Thank you.
It's on.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good description. The only other thing I would add is the opportunity, and this links to the previous session as well, of having comparable data, providing that platform for city-to-city learning. And that city-to-city learning in the metropolitan area, and nationally and globally, and providing that platform for solutions to travel. And it's why on our partner list, why we work with a lot of the city networks as well, because that is a very nice marriage, having the data to drive that city-to-city learning that those networks are fundamentally about. Okay,
good. Thank you for that answer. Does that at least in part give you... Good, I won't mention the rugby. So let's go on to the lady in the white jacket, followed by Amelia. If you can make 2 quick questions back to back. And if you can introduce yourself along the way.
Ali Muzila, I'm with the State University of New York. I run an International Relations and Global Affairs program for SUNY, State University of New York, young women. And one of my colleagues is in the back. I'm delighted to have her here as well. My question is to Patricia. I don't know if I've quite gone where Paul has about being data obsessed yet, but I was fascinated by your presentation. And you talked several times about culture of data. So my question is, with the whole thing now with Uber and other things, overused, I think, but still the bro culture, how do we take it as global citizens and deal with how does data translate, no pun intended, to culture, and how do you take in the cultural and global differences that data is seen?
That's a great question. It really is. So let's just hover on that one. Amelia, your quick question, and target it to one of the panelists if you so wish. So we have the data culture question. Amelia, the floor is yours. That's the rogue mic. That one wasn't working before.
All right, so thank you very much. I think this is being a very interesting panels, and congratulations for showing us that data is not only quantitative, but that you actually need to do a lot of work that is not quantitative, and that's where we are strongest at, and we have an application for local governments to know what each of the SDGs means to them that we produced even before the SDGs were adopted. And hopefully you have built on that, Patricia,
and the
to
question
work
is?
on that. And the question is,
thank you.
Okay, I'm happy that you're approaching gathering local data, but what are we doing about national data commissions that are not gathering any local data? There are things, for instance, as the number of counselors, of women counselors, that is data that doesn't need to be gathered by local governments only. It's national institutions should be gathering data on the local level as well. And for instance, SDG 5 is very dependent on that data for political participation of women. So I was wondering whether Stefan could enlighten us what type of dialogue are you having with the national statistical commissions to see whether they change the type of data they gather?
Two great questions. So we'll do who wants to take the culture and data question? I will. I've still got you on the list. Who wants to take culture and data? Okay. That's such a good question that you've beaten the panelists, so you get a prize as you leave, okay? And Stefan, the question on national institutions collecting data is for you. And if you can make it brief, then we'll take the last two questions. Then we're moving on to part 2. Okay. All right. Okay, so Mr. Arora from Statistics Canada, Amelia is going to answer your question. Over to you.
Well, I'll give you my perspective. I don't know if I'm going to answer the question. Look, resources are always going to be finite. Demand is always going to be infinite. So, so it's not just a matter of saying, why don't you go ahead and, collect more local data. That's why I was saying I think the partnerships are going to be crucial. There's going to be somebody that's going to have to make the case that, local level data for, you name it, girls in participation in whatever, is now a huge priority over something else. And there's going to have to be resources that are going to be allocated. And as I said, it's not just a matter of, just launching a survey and having a massive sample size to collect that information. I think the partnership equally has to step back and say, what are the avenues that are open to us that will get us the right balance, if you like, of good quality information to solve that policy need for a particular action that we want to take. And that's obviously based, and that's the whole SDG purpose, is where you start with, in a country, where are our priorities, where do we want to put our focus, and then start with the data, how it is that we're going to look at it through innovative ways, and then go about fulfilling those needs. And that's why I think the partnerships and the kind of dialogue that we're talking about is really, really important. Because if we start with this notion of, NSOs, why don't you have local data on everything, the conversation stops before you even begin. So it does require us to figure out what the priorities are and the best ways to go about fulfilling them in a harmonized way.
That's fabulous. I'm going to speed it up now because we need to move to the second question. We had 2 additional quick questions. The lady on the back row, if you could introduce yourself, maybe come to that mic, and then again our colleague from C40. Quick questions to individual panelists. Thanks.
Okay, so I came in late, so I don't know if I can address it to a particular panelist, but I was fascinated by your culture of innovation culture of data leads to a culture of innovation. Brilliant, I'm still it. But so my question is...
Sorry, who are you?
Oh, my name is Marianne Howland. I represent an organization called the American Sustainable Business Council, which is a DC-based organization that advocates for policy for businesses that are interested in sustainable business practices. And so one of the projects that I'm working on around the innovation is around people with disabilities. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. 10% of the world's population are people with disabilities. So my question is, in the world of data collection, and in getting information from these cities, is that part of the, is that in the conversation, or is that data being gathered? Because if so, please direct me to where I can find it, because we need it.
Great question again. Let's take C40. We'll answer those two questions and move on. Please, thank you. Thanks for the question.
Very data-driven organization, and we clearly make of data collecting a priority in terms of capacity building. I explained that in the panel before. I had a question specifically to the UN, and how are you approaching data for SDG 13, the SDG on climate change? We're particularly clear about this. When I look at the indicators who are proposed, it's a number of countries that have communicated climate action plans, integrated resilience in their planning. Is there, in the frame of the Local 2030 platform or in other context, a project to lower down this to number of cities doing this somehow? And I wanted to share also the experience that we're seeing in the UNFCCC process and the climate discussion, which I think we are close to agreeing or seeing that the UNFCCC is agreeing on a global, a single global standard for reporting GHG emissions at the city level. And that's a very interesting experience. So I wanted to know if in the development agenda, the UN is aware of this happening in the climate agenda, if you're planning to use this to track the SDG 13 and maybe to extend it to other SDGs, the same kind of thinking.
Okay, let's start with the question from the American Council for Sustainable Business. Who'd like to take that? Stefan, you take that one.
Okay, disability, just on disability, very quickly. Disability is one of the main disaggregation requirements in the agenda, and it's of course very challenging because, but we have been working on this a classification or identification of disabilities and questions. There is a Washington group that had developed questions. We've been working on this for a long time. I can say it is a little bit of an orphan area, and my office has just recently started. Actually, we had last week an expert group meeting on disability measurement because it's such a challenging area. And we have been able to launch a new program thanks to Australian support. So I think it is something we need to work on. It is very difficult culturally because what is considered a disability in one culture may not necessarily be so much considered a disability in another, but we are working on it. But this will take time. Can you easily find very finely disaggregated data at this point in time? Unfortunately not.
Good, okay, thank you. Good question, great answer. And someone to take the C40 question in terms of that link, climate data, single global standard on carbon. I'm sure it's all wired up, but tell us, Patricia, is that for you or is that for Stefan? Or is that
I can
for...
take a stab at a few of them really quickly.
Okay,
just to,
but no, let's keep on that question
okay.
to answer that question. Thanks.
The GHG?
Yeah, the last question, the
so
C40
the Global
question.
Protocol for Communities, the GPC that was agreed to, is part of the ISO standard. So the cities are already reporting GHG according to that GPC, and hopefully that's going to align to all levels. But I wanted to also say on the disability, if I may, just because it was such an important question, and we are looking at this, and we have opened ISO 37120 to a revision, and so some of the gaps were around urban agriculture, urban food security, and another gap was disability. So it's being worked on, but if you know how to help us on that, it would be fantastic, because those are really tough indicators to come up with that cities have the ability to measure. So if they're measurable, we can put them in. If they're not measurable, we can't put them in. So if you can help us,
so can we
please.
take that as a specific action to be taken out of the room and taken further? Right?
Thanks.
Put your hands together. That's a very firm action. Okay, before we move on to part 2, I'm playing Moderator's wild card, because we want some different perspectives in. And the millennials, I have already had a complaint, right? Because you should know about this stuff, and there's not one question coming from over there. I won't tell you who complained, but you're not going to get off the hook. I hope you understand my English, do you? Come on, between the 4 of you, one question. That would be fantastic. What have we got? Yeah, the wild card I'm going to play is I'd like to carry Ike from ITU to come in. And I'm giving you a little bit of a surprise there. But that's been a very rich session, right? What is your big takeaway? Briefly. No, we'll come back to that sort of thing afterwards. I'm just playing a wild card. I want your brief headlines on this session, on this wonderful session, and then we will go to part 2 before timing explodes. And I will blame the millennials. Carrie, Ike, what are you hearing from this session? What's your takeaway?
I said I have a short presentation, very short, just a few slides, just 2-3 minutes.
That's later on.
To give to give our perspective and where we are. Unfortunately, we don't have so many ITU colleagues here in the room because they are just initiating a new focus group on data processing and management today in Geneva. But I'm here to present this perspective. And I think we are working with ITU, we'll hear later, on a sustainability project related to KPIs and data management. And I think there is room for a lot of solutions. I mean, we need to really focus on different projects and solutions that we can implement a lot of these things that you are focused on. There's a lot of data obviously available, but how do we actually get to capacity building for cities? How do we break this down to something useful for cities and communities? And I hope that's maybe the presentation that we can show later, give you a perspective of how we've been thinking about this. Exactly the same last 3 years as Patricia's been working on the city data KPIs. So, yes.
And what's the one memorable thing from that panel? What stuck with you? What registered? I'm going to keep pushing till I get something. What is
I mean, my personal view is that it's extremely important, this data focus that we have. Because, if we cannot measure and find a way where cities are standing now to be able to measure their implementation of the SDGs or getting to where we want to get to, we will never be able to do this without the data. So I think we're on a good way here with a lot of the things and efforts that you've been doing. And I hope we can join forces.
Right, I, as a moderator, I've completely blown up the timing, but I think we've got enough fat in the system to manage. So hands together for part 1. That was a really tepid after lunch clap. Okay, give us a clap, please. Right, okay. We are now into part 2, and I am delighted to introduce, and I believe there's a PowerPoint presentation, just a short, quick one. Gary Dykes, who's the city manager in the city of Cambridge. Gary, I think you're with us. Gary, welcome. And I believe that you have a PowerPoint. Is that correct? Okay, sweet. You just jump into it. We're now officially in part 2, people. All right, so thank you for your patience. And then after that, we have Carlos Colombo, Secretary of Planning, City of Buenos Aires, one of my favorite places in the entire world. No question. Rugby, steak, sunshine, and fun, okay? I'm not paid in any way, shape, or form by Argentina for that, by the way. Over to you, Gary. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here on behalf of Mayor Craig. Unfortunately, through travel logistic issues coming out of Toronto, wasn't able to join us. But I think it's important for us to bring across the message of how the data translates down at the local level with the City of Cambridge. Just from a geographical perspective, the City of Cambridge is a medium-sized city, about 140,000 people. We're about 80 miles west of Toronto. The important part is we are in one of the areas in what's called Waterloo Region, as you can see on the map. We share a boundary with Kitchener and the city of Waterloo. We're one of the fastest growing areas in Canada, and we've been described at the federal level as being one of the economic drivers of Canada going forward. And as a result of that, with the rapid growth and also the transitional growth, because Waterloo Region has gone from being an agricultural-based area to a traditional manufacturing-based area, and now into the high-tech sector as well. So we've gone through a complete transitional shift. And the result of you combine that with the rapid growth, it's important that we have the qualified data to manage the growth properly and make sure that the decisions we're making today are sustainable over time. And so that's why it's important that we work with our partners, our city partners and national provincial partners to make sure this goes forward. As we've heard throughout the day, the cities are the ones that are responsible for the inputting of the data, or the implementation of the policies to try to achieve our goals, be it our local strategic plan goals, the ISO themes, but also more importantly the SDGs we've been talking about today as well. And one of the things we've started to do in the city of Cambridge is we've embedded these themes into our strategic planning document itself. The wording may not be specific, but the themes are there, and allows us to educate the citizens, as we've heard from the group this morning, of the importance of making sure that people understand what we're doing and why. And we look at things as how do we get there? And the ISO certification for us is one of the key elements in getting there. And Patricia asked the question before, did we find it difficult? And in Cambridge, we didn't find it difficult because we knew it was necessary. And we were able to put a team together, we were able to get the work done in relatively quick order, because we knew we needed that information to move ourselves forward. And the reason of that is the standardization of the data. And that's just the most important for us to achieve these goals. Is it allows us to talk to our neighbors, allows us to talk to our colleagues, be it international or national. I belong to an international group, the International City Managers Association, and so I can speak to Los Angeles, I can speak to San Diego, I can speak to Illinois, Chicago, and have a common dialogue over what we're trying to plan for. And I think because of that, it allows us to be very strong in the mobilization and implementation of the action to be successful in the development goals as set by the United Nations, as well as through our own ISO standards. As city leaders or local leaders, our daily work is this. We deal with this on an upfront basis, on a hands-on basis going forward, and so we get a different form of information coming forward. It's the direct result of the program, the direct result of a gap in our infrastructure. We hear that firsthand, and we can translate that now into a framework whereby we can send that around the world or within our own province, and it'll be understandable and recognizable. And it covers all the services we go through. I think in the city of Cambridge we offer 86 separate services to our citizens. So it's a lot of information to try to gather in given one time. And so the better we become at collecting and analyzing the data, the more we can improve the way the city works. There was one question around culture and how does data apply to culture. I may be taking this a bit out of context, but it allows us to understand what the people's needs are. And as we have a plate full of needs, if we are applying our data and our information properly and how we invest our money into our infrastructure, it starts freeing up money to broaden our perspective on how we invest in our community. Not traditionally hard services, but into the softer services, which will encompass the cultural element as well. So I think that's important as going forward. We also need the standardization to be able to measure our performance, because if we can't measure it, we can't really track it. And so it allows us to establish a detailed protocol where everything is data-driven with respect to identifying a global context with a local challenge, and from the local challenge into assessment of the local conditions and the creation of benchmarking going forward, or the importing of somebody else's benchmarking to our community because it's applicable, what saves us time and energy going forward, and hopefully gets to the point where we're implementing solutions and at the end of the day evaluate our progress. And importantly, when we're talking about how do we educate the citizenry, is being able to communicate how we invested, why we invested, and what the results were. And that is how you engage the population into finding out why these goals are important, and understanding the goals is how you can draw a direct line back to them as the citizens of our community and broaden it out going forward. We've had a number of areas where in Cambridge ourselves we've gone forward in specifically going into was water consumption. We run a very robust water system in our city. It's supported by our regional government. And we were going along thinking everything was fine, and so we started mining down into the data, and we were extraordinarily expensive to our citizens in providing water, and we shouldn't have been. And what we found was we were losing 28% of our water to leaks in our system because we buy the water from the regional government and sell it to our people. Well, we had a gap of about $1.8 million in that gap. We were, through the analyzation of the data and putting it forward, we've now reduced that percentage down by 5 or 6% in year one, and we're looking to get us down to 13%, which is the national average, within 5 years. And that allows us to take best practices from the City of Toronto and the City of Vaughan, both ISO partners, to move forward with a much better program for our water consumption piece. Building on this, that's why we were quite excited as Cambridge to be part of a data hub. Because from now a data hub, we view it as both external and internal, in the sense that we can share, as I mentioned already, we can take the data and share it on an external basis, whereby we're learning from our colleagues, from our counterpart municipalities, but also on an internal basis, because now the information is now broken down within the municipality itself. So we have the departments now understand the impact of what they do on other departments and also to the public. So we can transition on that way and bringing themselves forward. So, and on the other part is we're really excited that the positive nature this will bring to our community, and allows us to expand that knowledge out, hopefully bring people into the program, in the ISO program, support by sharing our data, showing the implementation of the best practices, and applied lessons learned. One of the things I'd like to kind of finish on is that the centralization of data is central to our form of the smart cities movement within Cambridge and Waterloo region. And it allows us to become a smart city. You have to understand what you do and how you do it, and that's where the data comes into key for us. But one of the things I'd like to also touch upon and to kind of close with, there was a comment made this morning about the kind of the disenfranchisement, I can't speak now either, the separation between the federal governments and the local governments, and how a lot of the blame seems to be pushed towards the federal government. I'd like to offer a counter opinion why, yes, we do believe the federal governments do need to activate more into the local sector. But I would say we have seen a positive trend in Canada with our current federal government in understanding the importance of municipalities. But I think through the use of standardized data and through the ISO standards and the SDGs, now is the time for municipalities to professionalize themselves, in the sense is collect your data, analyze it properly, and more importantly, report out properly to it, to allow you to properly inform the senior levels of government what your people need, and how impactful and how positive and how successful their programming is as you're implementing it going forward. So I think it's kind of again, back to the theme of partnership, but it's important that we go forward, we share information, publish our information, and educate ourselves as well as our colleagues and the public on the benefits of data. Thank you.
Good, Gary. Thank you very much indeed for that. Wonderful. I'm going to play my second and third Joker card before I come to you, Carlos, if that's okay. It's going to be very quick because we are coming. I'm building the anticipation for the story of Buenos Aires. All right. Okay. So my first one is Remy Hemerick. I'm going to link this session with the poverty alleviation session. This is completely off script, but Remy Hemerick is the executive secretary of a body called SOS Sahel, which has done wonderful work in the Sahelian countries on food, nutrition, and security over the last 40 years. Remy, I'm not expecting you to answer it now, but in this context of data and the countries that you work in, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, across the Sahel, and in terms of your work as an agronomist over the years and over the decades, where do you see the link with data? Don't answer it now. I'll give you a little bit of time, but I want to make a bridge between data and extreme poverty and the people who really are the furthest left behind, okay? So the other thing is, we have a question from a millennial, and I can't resist that. So Rene, is it Rene, is that right? Rene, if you could briefly come to a microphone. The lady next to you will help you. I'm sure you'll be able to manage to turn the button on. But if we can have the question, and forgive me, Carlos, but this is a question from a millennial. Who are you, Rene?
My name's Renee Corbiere. I'm an intern with the World Council for City Data.
Speak into the mic.
Is it working? Oh, that's better. Okay, so my question can be directed to any of the panelists. Today, I heard a lot of leaders speaking about the ways in which data can be used to ensure that no one is left out of reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. So I would like to ask what can be done to ensure that Indigenous communities and Northern communities are included in this development, and how we can fill the gap in the data collection in Indigenous communities.
I reckon that's one of the best questions today. Very clearly put. Thank you, Rennie. So who wants to pick up on the Indigenous, the First Nations, the gap, how that data piece can play out? So a quick one from Arora. And any of the other millennials, you can ask questions through the course of the afternoon. Please.
Firstly, thank you so much for that question. Statistics Canada, I can only speak from a Canadian context. We obviously have a number of surveys with our Indigenous population. So the census is the primary source. So once every 5 years, a very rich source. And in fact, over time, we've significantly increased the participation of Indigenous populations, both in our north, in our on-reserve population, off-reserve, our Métis, our Inuit, and we're getting really high-quality data. In addition to that, there's a post-census survey that we do that gets into studying really detailed information about our Indigenous population, education, health, mobility, etc. And we're starting to see the fruits of that labor as well. Now, that post-census survey, is limited in terms of its scope. In addition to that, what we're doing in Canada is helping build capacity, because there's a government direction and a push towards self-government and self-determination. And so we're actually helping Indigenous organizations build capacity, statistical literacy and statistical collection processing capacity. So those are efforts in Canada, and we've still got a long ways to go to be able to fulfill some of the fairly significant data gaps that we've got.
Okay, great answer. Do we just very briefly, do we have any other perspectives from other parts of the world on the Indigenous question? Please, just briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Eva Gurria, and I work with the Equator Initiative at UNDP. So we work with local communities and Indigenous peoples all around the world. Our focus is on sustainable development and more on investing in nature for sustainable development. So we're just curious, you're talking about the data and the information you have on Indigenous peoples, potentially in local communities as well. Are you mapping it in any way to protected areas or areas important for watersheds and forested areas? Just bringing together all these different sets of data that can allow you to work with these populations that have been left behind in the past, that have not been as privileged as us, and really require this data to be able to take policy decision at hand at the local level and with the local governments.
I guess the short answer is yes, because again, this is the power of collecting information on a standardized and harmonized basis. So if you look at the geographic dimension of where we collect information, all of a sudden being able to map a geospatial dimension to what you're seeing, being able to look at our environmental accounts now all of a sudden and start to look at physical water flows or air quality, all of a sudden you can now start to get a really good picture of what's happening in specific areas, and you bring in the people dimension, all of a sudden you can start to get a very rich source of information. So I think, again, it just comes back to that comparability, and I think the future is going to be a combination based on a very solid platform of harmonized concepts, the different kinds of data sources, whether it's surveys or whether it's administrative data or whether it's self-collected information.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you again, Rennie, for the question, which prompted a good conversational thread. Carlos Colombo, who is the Secretary of Planning for the City of Buenos Aires, is speaking next. Then we'll move to Adam Vaughan, Parliamentary Secretary, National Ministry of Families, Children and Social Development, Government of Canada. And to finish this component, after that, Barbara Chrysler from Philips Lighting in the Netherlands. So, Carlos, thank you very much for being patient. I believe you have a PowerPoint. Is that correct? Yes. You have a presentation. Over to you. The floor is yours.
Yes, I have. Well, okay. I will talk about Buenos Aires and our work with data. Sorry, I need light. That's right. The city is a living being, constantly changing, growing, moving, mutating, and transforming. As its habitat make decisions and do action in their territory. Our job is structured based on need of generating urban knowledge that reflects the transformation of the territory in such a way that we can establish diagnostic and conceptual basis on the transformation of the city. Through this transformation, we make the city better for citizens, while also making progress toward local and international sustainable development goals like the SDGs. We understand that the use of data to planning the city results very important to determine and detect the public policies we will implement. To understand and analyze this large amount of data that we release, it is essential to understand in which context we are, to analyze the context and to understand that the city is in continuous movement. There are two elements that we always take into account when planning the city. These are some of the variables that help us make those decisions. The second slide, please. The research of land uses classifies the economic activity and use of the city. Buenos Aires has 320,000 registered plots divided in 5 different principal uses. This means that 2/3 of the city is residential. This kind of analysis shows how the urban dynamics is. The building morphology of the city is quite low, and the highest heights are developed in the central area or along the corridors. The city has 220 million square meters built and has potential of 120 million square meters more. This data help us to develop the project of the new zoning code that will configure a more predictable and balanced city. Sorry, the force. For the last year, the city grew around 1 million square meters every year. The city has 3 differentiated areas with different property values among them. There are values of the north, center, and the south of the city. The identification of this problem allows us to elaborate public policies to develop a more balanced city. The first one. Buenos Aires has a population of 3 million people, and that more 3 million come to the city every day. In cooperation with the Secretariat of Transport, we have been working on the behaviors and flow of people of the public transport network. This enables us to recognize new subcentralities, areas of exchange nodes where transport network should be strengthened and evaluate the flow of the original destination during the day and night, and transport intermodalities from the metropolitan area and different points of the city. The other one. The Urban Sustainability Index measures 6 different indicators that were exposed in the urban and environmental plan of the city: public space, urban heritage, habitat and housing, transport and mobility, structure and central areas, production and employment. Buenos Aires is integrated by 15 communes. And this systematic index allows us to measure and diagnose in comparison to average of the city, how each communes behaves. The other one. The WCCD ISO 37/20 helps Buenos Aires to establish a standard measurement to be able to compare at local and international levels, finding successful cases to replay them in our city. As I described earlier, the new zoning code, the city is working to optimize the urban form and enhance density. Buenos Aires already has a compact urban form. In fact, as you can see from the graph, from the new WCCD SDG report, Buenos Aires has one of the highest density of the WCCD city network. The compactness of the city is a key driver of sustainable urban development, which is the focus of the SDG 11 for sustainable city and communities. SDG 11 also targets access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport system. Sustainable transportation is critical for reducing greenhouse gas emission in cities, but also for providing access to livelihood and employment opportunities for all sections of the population. Public transportation is a key component to the mobility system in Buenos Aires, and the city achieves the highest public transportation ridership among WCCD cities. The last one slide. Through the WCCD ISO 37120 data, we can not only demonstrate our progress and can learn from the other cities how they address our challenges. And in an increasingly globalized world, there is the need to strengthening ties and being closer. Thank you.
Can we leave that slide up? Carlos, that was just wonderful. Thank you. No, it brought the reality of what can be done in the context of a city with data in that powerful way. But as you threw that last slide up, I don't know who it was, but someone here whispered, "That's the second date."
Thank you.
So who was it? Oh, it was Martina Otto from UNEP. Good Lord! And I have it on good faith that UNEP has a question for you in the context of a wonderfully colourful and informative presentation.
Well,
UNEP. Yes. Yeah. I'll even push your button. There you go. Pleasure.
That's real cooperation.
That's Gold Concierge Service Moderation.
Perfect. Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation, and I was very much intrigued by the fact that you compared the city to a human being, and we have a tendency of doing that too. You spoke about the morphology. We speak about urban morphology and also urban metabolism, and so a question related to that. In urban metabolism, we look also at other resources, not only, well, the land, but really the water and energy and so on. Have you been looking at that as well? And what is it that it gives you in terms of comparing the morphology that you had and changes, tweaks to that in terms of your resource use? And if it's only the land, which is already super fantastic, then that's good enough. But I'd be interested in knowing that. And then if you like, I also have a comment that I could offer. You asked me takeaway to the first session. I just wanted to plug that and shut up now. Thank you.
Good. No, I'd like the comment. We'll have the answer first and then the comment.
Okay, I need answer in Spanish, please, and with translation for you, suppose.
So you're going to answer in Spanish, right? Is that right?
Yes,
Oh,
in
you want
Spanish.
the question in Spanish?
No. I understand your question, but I need answer in Spanish.
Okay, good.
Yes, it's possible.
Yeah.
Sorry. Nosotros estamos.
We are working on the a new zoning code for Buenos Aires. The morphological concept is only one part of it, because we're working on the completion of the city from a morphological point of view. Clearly from the point of view of the constructed part, but not what will be built in the future, like obsolete infrastructures or other parts of the territory where we haven't had any codification, because planning has to do with taking action, making a plan, correct it, and take a decision. So we are not planning it all from a morphological point of view. With regard to what you have said concerning water and other issues, our code goes back to 1967, so 40 years have gone by, so some concepts have not been included. We're working on what we would call environmental commitment, where a series of variables exist. The first decision of the government is to multiply green areas and deal with sustainability. But we also need a commitment from the private sector on half of our territory, which is private. And that commitment has to do with dealing with certain issues like the water collections from rainfall, recycling water, local vegetation, and a series of points which combined lead to 3 maps, like the hydric water map, and a map for green needs.
Good. Okay. Thank you for that that answer. And Martina, you had a brief comment.
Thank you. Yes, when you asked what was the takeaway of the first session, and what I thought was, well, making the connection with the morning session. And in the morning, we talked about the need for vertical integration of policies, how important it is that it really all sort of aligns. Now we had a whole set of discussion how our data sets should ideally align, not always do, and that we have to work towards that. And I think one of the big messages that we have to bring to people is that this alignment has to go hand in hand. If you want to see that data, well, this policy integration, that we need to have this data integration as well, and that we really think about this in combination. And I think that's an important message to give that underlines the importance of the data work. And of this session, I would say how important it is to demonstrate to others why we have that data. So using it to show why we do certain measures and what the impacts are, to make it relevant to people. And I think that's the power. And then we get out of that, oh yeah, it's data because it's figures and so on, but it's data really for a purpose. And it goes hand in hand with the service orientation that you mentioned in the previous session.
Martina, thank you for both the question and the comment. Best slide of the day. No question. You've hands down, it could be of the 2 days, all right? The tango slide. I love it. It was the tango, wasn't it? It is the tango, yeah? Well, you know, you can take the boy out of Liverpool, but we have a question at the back there. So I'm going a little bit free roaming now because we're okay for time. We've got a little bit of time. And Barbara, where's Barbara? Forgive me. You've been very patient. And also Carrie, not forgetting your 2-slider. And Adam next. Okay, thank you. Quick question.
all speakers and panelists. I'm Ider Batbayer from UNDP. I have a question in regards to data on perception data, and I'm not sure if I've heard about the use of perception data about on the policies and initiatives that are taking place, or whether it's forthcoming for the next speakers or so. But I'm not quite certain without the use of. Evidently, it's very challenging to use perception data, but without the use of it, I'm not sure if we would be able to draw a holistic picture of leaving no one behind.
Fantastic, good question. We're going to take a second millennial question, then we'll have the panel to answer, then to Adam. I'm sorry, I missed your name when you said it. And where are you from? UNDP, okay, great. Please, the second millennial question. Hi.
Sophie, I'm an intern at the World Council on City Data. So I was wondering, given the current state of technology, we know that more data is being generated than ever before, but it was also mentioned that people lack interest in participating in typical data collection means. Yeah. So how can we further educate citizens on the importance of their personal data in meeting global agendas such as the SDGs?
Just great questions. Okay, so we have perception data. Who would like to take that? Okay, and Anil, you take perception data. And I also want to flag the fact the lady's gone, but we haven't mentioned the culture data question. So perception data.
Yeah, I think a lot of statistical agencies, obviously we collect quantitative data, but we also collect people's values and weights on certain things to actually help determine where things go. And so we have a very robust general social survey, for example, that measures how people think, their interaction, let's say, with the judicial system. How's it going, and where do they see perceptions of, will their complaints be taken seriously or not? And that really also, I think, is a very important complement to developing policy. So I think even in the future, when I talk about more administrative data, and actually to pick up on the second question, administrative data are not, at least not that I can see, in the very short term, going to replace data that that we have to collect on people's values. Now I know there's some work that's being done in terms of artificial intelligence and machine learning to combing social media conversations and trying to get a sense of where do people value certain things. So even there are some advancements in terms of innovative work on changing perceptions. But all that to say is, yes, we do surveys that get at values of our citizens as well. Very quickly on the educating citizens on the importance of data, and I think that comes back to one of the points that I made. It starts really, really early. It starts with the education system, right at the grade 5, grade 6 levels, and then all the way up. We need to figure out a way to integrate data literacy. We need to help people understand, even those who are collecting information from administrative sources, how important the granular, the detailed information is. Because in many cases, as you pointed out, that'll be really one of the the only sources by which we're going to be able to get that information in the long run. So again, it has to start early, and we have to put some really conscious efforts in ensuring that we don't lose that touch as to how important these things are.
Again, another super brief, because Adam and Barbara have both been very patient. So. Gary and then Stefan, brief comments.
I just like to give a non-statistician's perception on that. And it goes back to my comments before, is if you're looking to engage the people, you have to make the data you do have meaningful to them. And that's showing results, that's showing you reporting out as to how are they benefiting directly from what you've brought in. And the more you can show a positive response to that information, the more they'll understand the value of what they're getting. And we've noticed an increase in the information we've gotten back by the increase in the value we've given out on the results of our research.
Fantastic. And Stefan, to finish on that thread.
Yeah, there are 2 quick points. I mean, the question on perception is indeed very important, because I mean, it's quite obvious that people act or take decisions sometimes more based on their perception of reality than the actual reality. So I mean, it is important to try to understand how people also perceive it. But for us, it's a very tricky challenge because it's almost impossible to standardize and to measure globally across very different cultural frames. So I mean, that's our challenge in this context. And on the question on understanding data, this is indeed very important. And when we talk about building data capacities, we do not only talk about the capacity to produce data, but also to consume data, to read data. Data literacy is a very important element of data capacity.
Stefan, fantastic. To finish on the education point, the longest romantic poem in English language is Aurora Lee by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And I'm going to take 2 stanzas and send it to Patricia, and you've got to circulate it. Because those 2 stanzas, I think it's about 180 pages, it's long. But the 2 stanzas really put into question statistics. And I think it goes to the heart of that educational question, how you have to get people on board, all right? And that poem goes back to 1856. I can't do it, Anil. I can't do it. Adam, super patient, and you are an MP, the Parliamentary Secretary, National Ministry of Families, Children and Social Development, Government of Canada, and you said earlier on today that you'd snuck into politics, national politics, which I quite like, the idea of sneaking into politics. I don't know if it's democratic, but you were there. So please, the floor is yours. That's a good clarification. Thank you.
But no. I'm going to once again disappoint my very loyal and able staff and completely disregard the speech that they've written out for me.
Staff worldwide are used to that.
They're getting used to it, but I will use points of it. First of all, while we discuss this, I think it's important to note I'm not a minister of the government. I am representing Minister Jean-Yves Duclos, who's the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, but my title is Housing and Urban Affairs. And if you're wondering why a social service agency has an infrastructure component to it, it's because the best tools to achieve social equity quite often are the investments we make in infrastructure, in particular in housing. And as we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, you cannot separate the investments in social services from the investment in hard services. The trouble is we measure them differently, we quantify them differently, and we respond to them politically in very different ways. And this is part of the challenge that we have, and one of the reasons we need better data if we're going to bring populations with us, but also transform populations at the same time. And I also want to acknowledge that as the individual has explained, that Canada has a very troubling history with its Indigenous population. And while much of what I'll talk about today will be about urban centres, a lot of the work we have to do on SDGs involve non-urban centres and involve the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples, of which we have 63 different nations, over 623 local governments, and almost by any measures that you apply, they live in the global south, even though they live in the high Arctic often. And we have work to do there, and the work I'm talking about today will touch on some of that, but we're talking about urban centers here, and while we have large urban populations, not all cities have large urban Indigenous populations. As a country, we have just come through a very strange decade. We had a government that I would argue said, don't give me the facts, just give me the anecdotal evidence, and did so in large part because the facts contradicted their ideological position on a whole series of issues, climate change not being the least of them. But we also had a prime minister who at one point, I believe, said, don't commit sociology, as though it was a criminal offense to study social patterns. And as a result, a number of us who were in local government were panicked about the future of Canadian cities. And Canada is a very urbanized country. Almost 80% of us live in large urban centers. If you don't have an analysis of where cities are going, you really don't have much of a handle on where Canadians are going. And so our government is engaged in a transformational sort of reset of federal priorities, and that's as true domestically as it is internationally. And one of the reasons data is so critical is that we have taken a very bold step to borrow a hell of a lot of money to go into debt publicly, very large debt, to finance this transformation, both locally and internationally. And if we don't get it right, we will effectively surrender the political contract to some very cynical forces, and the possibility of doing this again become much reduced. And so data matters to the federal government of Canada in a number of different ways. So effectively, the priority, has been reduced to some political slogans. I'll try to stay away from the slogans and make it a bit more practical. But the Sustainable Development Goals and Canada's new objectives are very closely aligned. Reducing inequality, creating a clean and a strong environment, taking action on climate change, using what's left of the old economy to build a new economy effectively, using substantial investments in infrastructure, almost $182 billion over the next 20 years is being forecast for federal expenditures alone, and also focusing on making sure that the outcomes for children and youth is transformed almost immediately. In fact, one of the first things we did upon taking government was invest in a basic income supplement for families with children that lifted close to 90% of the families in Canada received the benefit. Close to almost a third of a million children were immediately lifted out of poverty overnight. And it's these sort of bold moves that we're starting to make now domestically. But the most important component to that is how we're dealing with our anti-poverty agenda, how we're using infrastructure investments to get there. And the reason that we need strong data is because Canada is disadvantaged by being so big. It's such a massive geographic area. Unlike smaller European countries or even smaller countries in the global south, where proximity allows you to compare city to city. What works on the West Coast doesn't necessarily work in the high Arctic. What works in a rural community doesn't necessarily work in an urban community. And when you're talking about cities, with only 2 of the cities in Canada with subways operating, investing into public transit means very different things in very different geographic locales. And we need to know, if we're going to invest these dollars quickly, what impact we're having. And we can't afford just to simply make transit more affordable. We have to also make sure we have modal switches that drive down greenhouse gas emissions. We also have to make sure that we achieve social equity, and we also have to make sure that the investments we're making grow the economy so that the equation about borrowing suddenly makes sense. And so we are in a moment of growth, but a moment of very studied growth. And what the data that's being talked about today presents us with is an opportunity to compare our biggest cities globally quickly, to make sure that our major international cities are competing and are on a level footing with other international cities, but at the same time to understand how our smaller regional cities compare geographically very quickly with one another, to understand as well how our new foreign policy, which is got 3 pillars of defense, diplomacy, and development, how they work, to make sure that our foreign investment is also delivering on the SDGs and helping partner countries move forward, and then to make sure that the efficiencies that we're generating through this data can be translated back to Canadians so they understand how the investments we're making globally are actually having an impact. So when you talk about data, we need data to spend more effectively on the domestic front and to spend more politically palatable numbers on the international front. And we need to do it in such a way that Canada also meets its international obligations, in particular as it relates to the Paris Accord and the SDGs as stated. When we start to talk about these issues, Canada also has a very complex political structure that also requires us to be able to compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges against jurisdictions which are not similarly configured. And so we need assistance, not necessarily through a Canadian lens, but through an international lens, to be able to take a look at Aboriginal self-government in the north and compare its water efficiencies to major cities in the south and understand where those discrepancies come and where the inequities come from. We need to be able to work with provincial governments, which are large geographic areas of different range, of different configuration, and understand why infrastructure spending in the middle of the country is growing in the economy, but the same infrastructure spending in the east coast or the Atlantic provinces, where we have an older population, is actually facilitating the shrinkage of an economy. And what does that mean? Why does it happen? How do we reverse those trends if we need to make those investments? We also have a significant and a mature group of non-governmental organizations who are actors in these areas, both locally, provincially, and internationally. We need to assist those organizations as they make their investments and they partner with us. And we have an extensive university and research sector, which we have developed over years. We nearly surrendered it in the last 10 years. But we have a capacity to share that statistical and research capacity. As you can see with the University of Toronto here today, we have a capacity to be able to share that, and we need to know how to share it effectively and to share it in a way that we sustain this model of being able to compare, as we said, apples to apples, oranges to oranges. It is an ambitious program. It is a program that we have just embarked upon, and I'm happy to discuss it more with questions.
And that's super. That's laying out a super clear vision. Thank you. I said at said of the day that it was a rich feast. It has been a really rich feast. But Barbara, I'm going to go straight to you because you've been super patient and you're the last-ish sort of formal speaker, bringing in you. So no, I know there's on this panel. We've got Carrie Ike after that with the slides for a very, very strong finish, and then a couple of concluding remarks. So Patricia, you did it in February. You love to moderate for me, all right? Your eyes do it. Thank you very much. Barbara from Philips Lighting in the Netherlands, please, your perspective.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm really excited to be here for several reasons. First of all, I've been working for the UN for 16 years before going back to the private sector. So for me, this is a bit of a homecoming, and have lots of memories actually in these rooms.
Which part of the UN were you in for 16 years?
I was at UNIDO in Vienna, United Nations Industrial Development Organization. And now I'm back into the private sector, and I work for Philips, which is the largest lighting company in the world. But before I head into presenting just a few thoughts, I would very much like to thank Patricia for inviting me to this panel. I did notice, and I think I'm allowed to say that during the course of today, I've been, I think, the only private sector representative. And I wish to see more private sector representatives in meeting like that, because let's face it, we're not going to achieve the SDGs without the private sector. And although I hear people talking about the importance of the private sector, we are rarely invited, and this is why I think I really would like to
Barbara, that's a good point.
Patricia.
Well taken, and we will definitely relay that on to the powers that be. But I am a co-conspirator with you. I'm also private sector. So the moderator.
Yeah, but you're the moderator. You're not a panelist.
yeah. But the moderator controls all. Don't forget that. So.
Absolutely. But actually, you know, Paul, I'm now actually going to go off script because I'm also going to use a wild card, if you don't mind. And I would like to take. I would ask you to take over the microphone from you and actually give my points standing up. The reason for that is, first of all, I don't like sitting down, and second, I'm really jet-lagged, and I think I'm actually better standing up, if you don't mind. Thank you so much. All right. So thank you very much once again. I think it's all very clear from the session that we heard today on data that we live in a data-driven society. And in fact, the volume of data that we are generating today is incredible. In the last 2 years, and I've actually just researched that, we generated more data than in the entire last century of humankind. I mean, let's just think about that. And this is certainly going to continue to increase. And I also researched that we are doing 40,000 Google searches a second. So the appetite for data is also really impressive. I would like today to zoom into one of the SDGs that for us as a lighting company is particularly important, and that is around energy. And energy has actually been recognized in SDG 7 as one very important SDG. In fact, all of them are important, but I would argue that energy is really the golden thread to development. Without energy, we won't have development. Without sustainable energy, we won't have sustainable development. I would like to also make the point that cities really hold a key when it comes to fighting climate change. Cities account for 3% of the Earth's land, so very little, but they actually generate or consume 70% of global energy, and at the same time are responsible for 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So whatever decisions cities are making today in terms of infrastructure, transportation, energy, land use, you name it, are going to have significant impacts for the decades to come. And so, and the decisions they are taking will be very difficult to unravel once they have been taken. Lighting is one of these challenges that cities are facing. And in fact, you probably don't know that, but about 50% of municipal energy, of the energy bill goes to public lighting. 50%, that's a lot. With the recent invention of the LED light bulbs, we can actually drop the energy bill in cities instantly by 50%. So you can actually save half of your energy bill for public lighting just by switching to LED. And if you connect those to smart sensors and to the internet, these savings can go up to 80%. However, we don't see that this transition is happening fast enough. And part of that reason is because cities just don't have the accurate data to measure the impact of smart and sustainable lighting solutions, to measure progress, and to compare themselves to other cities around the world. And this is the very reason why last year we decided to partner with the World Council on City Data to exactly help this acceleration in the renovation of smart lighting infrastructure so that city decision makers can make the right and smart decisions moving forward by measuring the impact that this lighting infrastructure can actually take on them. The reality is, of course, and we heard this today, and Patricia also made that very clear, that there is a lack of data, and there's a lack of good data. We have a lot of outdated data. We have sometimes no baseline. So how can you measure progress if there's no baseline? And what I also see is that we see data in silos, and this also has been mentioned today, and I think this is critical because once you connect these different data points together, you can derive at conclusions that are really interesting and that can really make a difference in how you make decisions. And I would like to give you an example on that. We have worked together with the WCCD on a report that actually looked into two foundation cities. One is Buenos Aires. I'm very happy that we have a representative of Buenos Aires here today. And the other one is Los Angeles, LA, to see how public connected lighting actually can have not only environmental benefits, but also social and economic benefits. And when we look, for instance, at LA and Buenos Aires, the savings that they have made are really impressive, and the data speaks for itself. In LA, since 2013, they had 140,000 lights that were converted to LEDs. They managed to get the energy savings of 63%, and they saved $9 million US. Just imagine, no matter where you are, in which city in the world, whether it's the global north or the global south, all cities are struggling with budgetary issues. So imagine how you could use that money that you're saving there and put that into other infrastructure like schools or hospitals or what have you. And all of this by just switching your lighting infrastructure. The city of LA, for instance, also had some very important social benefits because the crime rate in property theft actually went down by 21%, and in theft and burglary by 10.5%. And the amount of car accidents that happen at night dropped by a staggering 30% just with good lighting. This is where you get the attention of city planners and city decision makers, because suddenly lighting is not just lighting, but it's actually a whole different set of data that you're putting together and that can make a difference to cities and to citizens, because citizens feel safer, they feel they live in more livable cities, and so it all comes together. On the economic benefits, I also have quite interesting data from San Francisco. In fact, there, the lighting of the Oakland Bay Bridge generated an additional $18 million in economic investment, because the city suddenly attracted more tourists, more businesses opened up, more restaurants, and all of this generated additional economic benefits for the city. I think I would like to leave it like that for now. I just wanted to make that point that data is absolutely instrumental for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The private sector is keen and ready to work with all of you guys, and let's join hands and make this happen together. Thank you.
Barbara, thank you very much for that, that final insight from the last speaker on the data panel, although we're not quite finished yet. And your point about more private sector in the room will be transported back to the powers that be. So, Carrie, Ike from ITU, I'm going to go to you to finish strong on your perspective in the context of data. So, Carrie, the floor is yours for a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have to say it's 1.5 person here from the private sector, and because I'm here representing the ITU today, because I'm also leader in this initiative, but I'm also representing a business platform with more than 500 companies, but we are working also very close with a lot of UN agencies, and we have previous colleagues with Barbara. So, but let me have a very short presentation on an initiative that we've been setting up. And on behalf of ITU, I'm here to inform about this global solution initiative. It's set up to support cities to reach the SDGs. I hope this could be an example of a very concrete solution project based on everything we heard today. The project is set up as a unique multi-stakeholder context under ITU and UNECE, plus 100 organizations has been part of the program. We have 16 UN agencies part of this initiative, a large group of private sector, and a finance sector is also the basic stakeholder of this initiative. Let me go back to the slide on here. The ITU and the UNECE has developed a definition on smart sustainable cities. Smart sustainable city is an innovative city that uses information and communication technologies and other means, not only, to improve the quality of life, efficiency of urban operation and services, and competitiveness, while ensuring that it meets the needs of present and future generations with respect to economic, social, environmental, and as well as cultural aspects. You will see that in the KPIs that's been developed. Second, please. There is a KPI project for smart sustainable cities to reach the SDGs. These KPIs has been developed, as said, since 2014 through also advisory groups in the ITU. The KPIs are not finished. We have 91 KPIs. You will see that on the next slide. The main thing here you see it's 91 indicators, 54 core, 37 advanced indicator. Is very similar build-up as Patricia showed earlier here, covering different sections, cross-dimension of economy, environment, society, and culture. Maybe next slide. I'll not go into all of this. We basically have more than 100 cities lined up to evaluate based on the KPIs now. We're going to start in the first 50 cities, but all cities are welcome to join these initiatives. There will be cities on each continent. The aim is to have 10 cities on each continent that will be evaluated by the KPIs in the first round. Maybe next slide. I just want to say that the KPIs and the framework is one thing, and the data and all the process that's happening there, but it's also a much bigger program going into the solutions. And we are working on everything from how do we get to projects, how do we finance projects, guidelines for cities on planning strategy. There is a range of groups linked up to this initiative with different stakeholders and also through all the 60 new agencies that you see in the frame here. I also want to mention very briefly that the ITU has set up a new focus group on data processing and management to support IoT and smart cities and communities. And the first meeting is today and tomorrow in Geneva. And this is also open for everybody to join. Thank you very much. I think that's just a little bit on the publications. I just want to mention that the U4CC was set up in May 2016 was the launch. We have a report coming out of the first U4CC phase. This is a report where we're also giving case studies on cities linked to every SDGs. And this will be available in September this year. And several other guidelines that is also linked. And if you go to the next slide, I think we have the websites up. U4CC, there is their own website to this initiative. Thank you very much. It's very short in 3 minutes, but if you have questions, please.
No, can we have the lights up? Thank you. Carrie, that was a really tantalizing end to the day because it's sort of, I guess it's like discovering your Christmas present the night before Christmas Day, if you'll forgive the cultural reference, because there's a lot to unpack there. So thank you very much, and thank you for joining us. I don't believe we have a colleague from UNFPA in the room. We were meant to have a brief introduction there, but that's not going to happen. So Patricia, what I think we should do is maybe close the data session. Would you agree it's been rich? Right, did the millennials play an important role? And you seem to have quite a few interns at WCCD.
Yeah.
Yeah?
We do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we
no,
brought,
no
we
gender
brought
balance,
them all.
No gender balance,
We
though.
brought them all. Well, we have Nick.
No, thank you very much for your question. Forgive me, I'm saying things I shouldn't, but thank you for your input. Patricia, do you want to close and thank the speakers for this session? And then we've just got a few minutes by which we're going to top and tail the day with some very, very close colleagues who've come in to join us. But Patricia, I'd ask you to close what has been a fascinating session. And before Patricia closes, put your hands together because that was rich. One point of order, that it's not necessarily a bad mark on the panel's books, but the culture and data question was not answered. So I think there should be a bilateral afterwards in some way, shape or form. It needs to be answered. Patricia, the floor is yours to close briefly. And again, thank you to the speakers for a wonderful tour de force through data. Patricia.
Well, first of all, thank you to Paul, our moderator, because he's really driven data to a higher and higher level with his espresso shots. So I thank you for that, because sometimes people go to sleep when they listen to people talk about data, but
that was a full Nespresso sheet machine today, not just shots.
Thank you so much. And to all of our speakers, thank you so much for traveling all the way from Buenos Aires and the Netherlands and Cambridge and closer to home.
Across the street.
Ottawa. I'm so glad that you're all here to celebrate this championing data for the SDGs.
Hey, listen, just straight
fantastic.
off the presses, apparently we're trending on, what's it called? Social media.
Excellent.
Apparently, that is a very good thing, isn't
That's
it,
very
Emily?
good. Very
Trending
good.
on social media. Local 2030.
And I just also wanted to say a couple of thanks and then just to close on a few key points that I think came out. But one of the thanks, and I'm sorry she has just left the room, but our executive advisor to Premier Kathleen Wynne was in the room for Ontario government, who has been joined at the hip with us. The Premier's office and the Ontario government has been really instrumental in starting this whole process back in 2008, and they've been supporting us every inch of the way. So the Ontario government, sorry she's just had to run to LaGuardia, but I'm hoping she'll hear this. And also to Richard Summer, who's sitting just over there, because Richard Summer is the Dean of the Faculty, the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design. And Richard has been the biggest
Richard,
supporter.
just put your hand up, because that's Richard Summer.
Yes.
Richard, thank you for all your help.
Richard Summer has been incredible and supporting us at the University of Toronto when no one else did, and keeping this data and this indicators. I mean, if it wasn't for Richard and the province, the ISO standard would never have been published. So, and he continues to help us with these incredible millennials, the interns at the back. So at the university has been incredible for us. So I just want to say that it's been, thank you, Richard. And finally, just a couple of closing key points that I think is worth just saying very quickly in
Briefly,
5 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay. It's really important for me to see how cities are stepping up on the SDGs, because as we know, many countries have already passed 90% being urban. So the UK and Argentina and other cities, other countries around the world are now upwards of 90% urban. Canada's around 84 or 85% now. So, of course, the SDGs have to be considered in cities. That's the key point here, and that local investment, therefore, by city builders, driven by data, these partnerships that Adam spoke about for infrastructure are really pivotal in all of this. And data can drive better decision-making for sustainability. And then this issue of harmonization, the global, the national, the local, the provincial, this clawing of data from all levels of government is so important to harmonize, and I think that came through in the beginning of the session. And the call for partnerships, finally, I just wanted to say that this is the most pivotal part of going forward for us, because we do know that capacity building in city governments and local levels of government, whether it's in northern communities in Canada and Indigenous communities, or whether it's in the largest cities like Lagos, we need help to build the data. So thank you very much, because I think the SDGs all build to go towards goal 17, which is the partnership goal, and we should end there by saying it's these partners, corporate, academic, national, provincial, on her way to LaGuardia, global, local, and we have to keep these partnerships strong, because that's the way we're going to crack this data to really make sure we get to 2030 in a really
Patricia, I think
successful
thanks to you and also
part.
the WCCD team,
Thank
to Matthew,
you.
for James, and the
All our
millennials
staff.
for two of the best questions of the day. Renee and
Sophie.
Renee and Sophie, top stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for putting the session together. Let's put our hands together to close the data session. Now, as we close, we're about to close in a few minutes, so bear with us. We won't transition out. We'll close in this way. I'm going to ask now Amir Dossel, who's the chairman of the Global Partnerships Forum, to speak briefly, and it will be briefly, unfortunately, Amir, but every word will count. And what has run through the whole day is the issue of partnerships, right? It's partnerships and new forms of partnerships, and testing the boundaries around what partnerships are. And Amir is going to give us his perspective. I guess I will say many decades of experience, Amir. Is that fair to say? But yeah. Well, listen, Amir, the floor is yours for just a few minutes on partnerships to give a closing perspective there, and then we will close. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm honored to be here, and I just want to endorse what Patricia said about you. You're amazing, actually. So a round of applause for you. Of course, what I'm about to say is nothing new to you. Nothing happens without partnerships. And partnerships are actually fairly simple, but also fairly complex. But if you step back for a second and say, how can you make partnerships work? They are about relationships. We need to understand what the other side wants, not what we want. And once we get that, then we can go a long way in this. And I'd like to start by introducing a very good friend and colleague and a senior diplomat at the United Nations, Ambassador Courtney Rattray, who's the permanent representative of Jamaica to the United Nations. He has been really the architect of the 2030 agenda amongst a group of 4 or 5 ambassadors altogether. He led a number of working groups, and he's now the co-facilitator for the ministerial declaration, which is about to take place next door in conference room 4. So I'm honored to have Ambassador Rattray. Thank you, sir. So if I can just step back for a second and say to you that if you just remember that the 17 goals, or rather 16 goals, can be threaded together through the partnerships. That's the golden thread. But we must not forget two other, if you like, connectors. Technology, especially broadband access. And the other thing we tend to pay lip service, and I'm sorry my species does that, is the lack of real effort to address gender equality. Gender equality, women's empowerment is one of the biggest challenges faced by humanity. We are missing out on 51% of the people. Those of us who are, who've had a spouse for a number of years know who is the CEO, not just of the household, but CEO of the business we run. So I'm just saying to you that that partnership is as important as innovative public-private partnerships in the world. Thank you very much indeed.
Ambassador, I don't know if you wish to make a very brief comment in terms of the spirit of what's happening next door in the context of the SDGs in terms of localization. It's up to you. It may have been a long day for you. Okay, I'm continuing. That's a good point. So, with that, let me close what has been, I think it's been a good conversation. Who's been here most of the day? It's been full. It's been rich. And we're going to continue tomorrow. And we really have got a super series of sessions tomorrow. We're doing energy, oceans, and then poverty alleviation. And that will complete the 2 days. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for being an energetic and engaged audience. I didn't see too many iPhones during the course of the day, which is always good. I've been asked by Kerry Constable from the Secretary General's office, just very quickly, to thank the team, Diego, Emily, David. You know who you are, but you put together an absolutely incredible event, I feel, in a short period of time. Danetta as well, who's the champion of trending us. Is that right? Is that? Yeah, well, I don't know if the language works. We're trending. That's all I know. We're trending. It's good. And the local SDGs are trending. So thank you to the whole team. Also, thanks to the UN Statistical Division, to UNEP, to ITU, UNFP, UNDP, the Equator Initiative. Thank you for coming and participating. Also to local government networks, NRG for Sustainable Development, and UCLG. Everybody mentioned and more besides have participated in providing a rich agenda and a good discussion. And the translators, great job. Thank you very much as ever. Bob in audio and visual, thank you. And conference services, thank you very much for putting the lights down so I could rush to the restroom. That was fantastic. Good. Let's close there, and please do come back tomorrow. Thank you for your engagement. Bye now.